Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. This is going to be my review, my in-depth breakdown for N104 Into the Dark, Netflix Avatar Episode 4. So this brings us to the halfway point of the series, 4 more episodes to go after this one. But let's jump straight in here with my general thoughts. So I think, like a lot of people, this has to be considered one of the weakest episodes of the series. This one is a real mixed bag because you do have to acknowledge that the Iroh and Zuko stuff in the episode is really good. There's especially, I would say, 2, maybe 3 scenes with Iroh that are excellent, among the best in the entire series. But it is the smaller plot point of the episode, and the main plot, the other side of the episode, is pretty messy. So you do, I think, really feel how messy it is because of how solid episode 3 was. So we see stuff like Jet and the Mechanist get wrapped up very quickly, pretty early on in the episode. They don't have a lot to do in the middle of the episode because we randomly decide to do the Cave of Two Lovers, and only with Katara and Sokka, leaving Jet, leaving the Mechanist, leaving Teo out, just these two. We're bringing this book 2 plot point up here for whatever reason. Then we obviously have to talk about Bumi. They do the changed by the war arc that they're trying to hit with quite a few characters. So you can sort of see thematically this episode kind of approaches that, because that's kind of what the Iroh side of the episode is about to a certain degree. But to me, it doesn't really work that well with Bumi as a character. This is where the weird amalgamation of episodes that the Omashu arc here doesn't quite work. Trying to really make Bumi like very serious, but you still want him to be kind of weird, and it just feels like they never choose one way or the other, and it makes this plot that is nowhere near the subtlety, the nuance of the Iroh and Zuko stuff. The Bumi plot comes across as being so basic, in a way so forced. It's just frustrating, I think, as you go through, because you see so clearly that they can do excellent stuff when they really put their minds to it, but then other stuff is just a real challenge for them. Because Bumi really hits Aang over the head with the whole "you ran away" responsibilities arc, and it's just sledgehammer levels of subtlety to still be hitting this drum 4 episodes into an 8-episode series so far. So we'll get into the details here. I think that's the best way to do this, to go into the recap here. So of course we open up with Aang and Iroh in Omashu prison. Zuko's not here. They kind of reference in a way back to this a few times, of just like Aang is beginning to see who Zuko really is because he's left Iroh behind like this. Iroh says, I doubt that you actually know what he's like. But he also says, again, foreshadowing here, that the Earthbenders are not so kind to their fallen foes. And there's a few lines like this in the early Iroh scenes where he's clearly alluding to something, and you're just waiting and waiting for the drop of, like, we know it's Lu Ten, but are they actually going to go for it? What way are they going to showcase that, the reveal of the death of Lu Ten? And I think they do it really, really well in this episode here. So pretty nice stuff. Another kind of new scene here, Aang and Iroh together, and you get some nice kind of subtlety here overall. Going into the other side of the episode, one of the few Mechanist scenes here in the early part of the episode, we do get the sort of resolution here, and this is where this episode feels a little bit weird, where because this is a longer episode than the previous one, it does feel like there's a few of these scenes that, like, why wasn't this just in the end of the last episode? Why is it in here where we're doing kind of something else? But this has to continue in here because we want to do this, like, Sokka and Katara arc. So yeah, confronting Sai about the betrayal. He admits that he did it, but it was to protect everyone. There's a bit of a back and forth about how, you've presented tech to the Fire Nation, anything can be turned into a weapon. But Sai tries to present the point of, hard choices. Some of us have to make them. You know all about that, Sokka. Your father had to make one, leaving you in charge when you were so young. We do what we must to survive. I do like this bit of positivity finally about Hakoda. He would have never done that. He would have never gone that far. And this is when Katara reveals that Aang is actually in prison. So the plot beginning to sort of come into play here. And again, this stuff with Sai here is fine. Like because it's very related to the last episode, it's like cool, okay, the continuation of that arc, not bad. It's just it does get dropped not too far into the episode from now. Quick scene just highlighting what Zuko's up to. He takes an Earth Kingdom soldier's outfit and goes undercover to hunt down information on like Iroh, basically. Then we get a flashback scene with Bumi. And yeah, what we just get here is like he's come back from like earthbending training. He is the one to be revealed to have made Aang's Sky Bison whistle. Though initially he says, I intended it to be a badger mole. And they just laugh over this, highlighting the fun that they had together in a more, you know, good times in Omashu style thing. It's one of those ones where like I can see what they're trying to do, of course, because in the original episode, you have some flashbacks to young Bumi, but because you have changed Bumi's arc, I think they should also change the way they do flashbacks here, because to me, this Bumi doesn't just need the childhood flashbacks. This Bumi affected by the war needs flashbacks to various stages of him dealing with being a leader in Omashu and how the war has actually affected him. And it really kind of, I think, suffers a little bit because they just tell us about it and don't really kind of give us the full context. And for a character like Bumi, it just feels a little bit kind of unbelievable to a certain degree because of the type of character that he is. Back to Iroh, he praises Earthbender's structures, of course, no seams and stuff like that. And we just get across the idea of like, you know, Aang prefers the nicer aspects of cities, but they note that like darkness is coming more and more into various cities because the war has raged on for so long. Ozai can only see things through one lens, and that is victory or defeat. Not even the loved ones lost along the way. So another kind of reference to like Ozai and the loss of kind of loved ones, but I'm guessing it's just referencing the lack of perhaps care he presents when we get to the Lu Ten scene kind of later on. But just highlighting that he's so focused on just winning things. But then the contrast to Zuko, where for Zuko, victory is winning his life back, not necessarily like winning the war. He's just slightly on the wrong path, feeling that that's the way to achieve the other style thing. Aang tries to convince Iroh that, you know, you could show Zuko that this isn't the right way. He owes you that much, doesn't he? But Iroh's like, no, you have it backwards. You know, it is I who owes him a lot, actually. So the again, another foreshadowing scene of like, oh, why? Because otherwise it feels like Zuko actually is the one who should owe Iroh a lot for being with him all this time when like he's just his uncle. Like, what's going on here? So what has Zuko done for Iroh? We're waiting to get that reveal, of course. Just a real quick scene here. Just this is where the secret tunnels get brought up here. The Mechanist has seen them, says the whole legend about them, and ultimately like agrees to help overall here. So just highlighting kind of this is partially the redemption of the Mechanist, whereas with Jet he's too lost to his revenge. At least with the Mechanist he's going to redeem himself kind of across a couple of these scenes here. The point probably has to be brought up. This feels like a very forced plot point of like, we need to get into the palace because Bumi is being really weird about like capturing the Avatar and like in a way also kind of ignoring the people who saved his life from an assassination attempt. So Katara and Sokka have to like break into the palace through the secret tunnels. It's like, why are we doing this? And especially when like the Mechanist is the Mechanist to the king, can he not get them into the palace or even anywhere near it? So that's why I just feel that the whole setup surrounding this is such a forced plot point, bringing secret tunnels in here. It's so unnecessary overall. And I'll talk about that a few times as we go through this. Iroh, quick scene mentioning like the pit, the Earth Kingdom labor camp for prisoners of war. And then the interesting point of like, Aang, you will be brought to see the king, which is worse apparently than going to this labor camp. I bring this up at this point just to highlight that, oh, I guess Bumi was never told that the prisoner in his prison was Iroh. Otherwise, like, it brings up the plot point of, does Bumi not care about his fellow Order of the White Lotus member, Iroh, here? But because he's so broken down by the war, does he even care full stop? And it just brings up a few questions about the Order of the White Lotus. Because you have Iroh in or around Omashu, I guess it's just the idea that these guards don't realize it's Iroh, whereas it's the Earthbender captain later who does, but he's already left the city at that point. So I think that's how they avoid kind of this whole situation, in a similar way to the fact that, like, hey, Iroh's in the north, but like he never comes into contact with Pakku. It's just an interesting thing with the logistics that happens here. And then the other part of the mechanism is that, hey, we haven't actually like fully redeemed or done anything with him yet. So he still is in touch with his Fire Nation contact. We haven't addressed him properly doing something different. Him helping to save Aang is not the same as like reversing what he's done in helping the Fire Nation. And then this is the setup for this. Like, this is just kind of bookmarked. It's like Sokka urges him to like give up his Fire Nation contacts to the authorities and, you know, go against them. He's, of course, very worried, but Teo wants to fight back, and the idea is that, I guess, the Mechanist just goes along with what his son wants at this point. So, you know, no time for the Mechanist in the middle of the episode, I guess. But yeah, then we get the first kind of King Bumi scene here. Aang's brought before the king. And yeah, we don't mess around with the whole identity of Bumi and the mystery surrounding that. It's just, hey, it's me. And the questions get brought up immediately of like, how are you still alive? And Bumi just says, clean living and mostly luck. And then it's like, how are you alive, Aang? And he's like, it's a long story with the idea that it's told off screen in between Aang and Bumi's scenes with the setup for the feast. The performance of Bumi, I think, is pretty well done. It's just that I think this arc of making him more serious and making it into much more of a plot point than the original episode was doesn't quite work for me. For reasons we'll get into as we go through the scenes here, of course. Then this is the only Jet scene in the entire episode. And this is where it's like, why didn't you wrap this up last episode? Because we don't do anything with Jet apart from this. It's a good scene, but it feels very odd and we need to wrap this one up before going into the next thing. And you could tell that this arc across 2 episodes kind of did struggle at points, I think. So yeah, it's just basically Jet thinks Katara has betrayed them. She just notes that she's protected innocent people because he was planning to like blow up a lot of people, basically. He thought she was on their side, but she points out, and she gets quite like I like this from Katara here because it gets to the core of her character, at least here. Jet has forgotten what he's fighting for. He's let bitterness fill his heart. He's not fighting for those he loves. He's fighting against those that he hates. And that's the important distinction for Katara. And this is very much like the Firebenders. So he tries to grab Katara, but she throws him to the ground and then ices him to the cart before leaving. It isn't really much of a fight. It's just, hey, I'm done with you. I'm leaving. And I guess this is the setup ahead of, I guess, some sort of a Jet scene if they ever get book 2 to do that. So again, they haven't really done anything overly fancy with Jet. It's mostly pretty accurate to what they did with Jet. No real attempt to sort of bridge the gap, at least just yet. But it's really noticeable. Only one Jet scene in the whole episode. Zuko makes his choice in the following scene about like, hey, Iroh was taken here, Aang was taken there. What choice are you going to make? And literally the guard is like, so what are you going to do? And it's a fun enough scene. But then we get to, this is the scene where I think the Bumi characterization really starts to come out, and you sort of see that like, okay, I guess I see what we're doing here. So he makes the jokes, which I think is pretty good, like the lettuce leaf. They do a slightly altered, like Kangaroo Island kind of style joke, but like it still, I think, gets the general kind of point across. But also, he's testing Aang here, and this starts, we have to bring the challenges in, of course, because this is where we get this odd dynamic in the episode where if they want to do serious Bumi, commit to and do serious Bumi and do it well. But instead they're like, we want to do this, but then we also want to have the original and the weirdness and the games and the kind of fun parts of Bumi as well. But meshing them together, to me, just does not work that well. So, okay, test to make sure he's a vegetarian with the food. I guess that's test number 1. Bumi then gets quite serious, highlighting Aang's 100-year absence in the ice. You were just sleeping, basically. That must have been nice. Versus 100 years of war that the world has faced. Aang talks about how, no, it wasn't nice. The air nomads were wiped out. And soon the waterbenders will be too if I don't get to the Northern Water Tribe. And Bumi just brushes these kind of concerns aside. And this is part of why I have a big issue with this is that Bumi is holding Aang prisoner here to test him, preventing him from getting to where he needs to go quicker. Yet he's badgering and absolutely criticizing Aang for not doing his duty, not being responsible, and all of this sort of stuff. But he's holding the Avatar prisoner, preventing him from affecting the world. Plus, Omashu is technically not involved in the war currently. So it's this really confused arc that they're trying to do here, where Bumi is criticizing Aang for not being involved, even though Aang is trying to do everything he can to make amends for not being around for 100 years. Yet Bumi has also kind of backed away from everything, but he's still laying into Aang over this. I get the change by the war and the point that they make here of, I have lived for 100 years, you just happen to be over 100 years old. There's a big difference in our like experience of like missing 100 years of war versus seeing it, you know, day by day. I get that point, but it's still, you have this construction over the top of it of like, what are you doing here? And it comes back to the fact that they still just try to do the original plot of the episode, which is, in the original one, it's just a kind of minor test that is mostly Bumi just messing with Aang to highlight the fun character. Here, it's serious testing because he doesn't believe he's a good avatar, and he thinks all this serious stuff is what needs to happen. And again, it's the Aang responsibility arc, just sledgehammer hits over and over again across these episodes of like, do you understand, viewers? This is his arc. He is the reluctant avatar. He just wants to have fun and play games, and it's like, but that hasn't been Aang in the episodes as you've presented him. He stepped up in episode 1. He steps up in episode 2. He's trying to fix things in Omashu. He literally had a scene where he's like, I'm taking a detour to fix things here. And now he's wanting to get back on the road to go up to the Northern Water Tribe because the main threat is mostly over. Bumi now has become the threat. Like, that's the kind of like issue that we have here. Like, and I just don't understand how the writers couldn't see that that's what they kind of ended up kind of creating here. Aang can't believe that Bumi has lost hope, and Bumi takes this as a challenge. And so we're playing on this idea of like this very forced way to construct this into some sort of a challenge that, oh, I don't believe you've lost hope. Challenge accepted. I will convince you that I have lost hope. Is that the point? Like, it's so weird. Then we get into secret tunnel stuff. And I want to make it clear, the casting and like the performance for like Chong and the other nomads is good. I think the general visual way that they showed the Omashu backstory is cool. It's just, why is it here? Just be patient. Wait. Let it be in book 2 when you need to have it in book 2, because by all accounts, it feels like the setup is still there to do Return to Omashu. It doesn't feel like that's something we're skipping. But anyway, we have some fun times with the nomads singing. He shows them the dangerous tunnels up ahead. Then he tells them the story of Oma and Shu, which is the same as the original, except for 2 details. Shu is now a woman, and it is Oma who dies in the war. And those are things that, of course, are reversed in the original. My question here is literally, these are literally detail changes. Like, the story fundamentally doesn't change in any regard just because you've made these changes. But because of that, why? And the one thing that you would say it adds is it adds kind of representation, having the story of the formation of Omashu be 2 women. But my kind of counterpoint to that is like, Kyoshi was in episode 2 in a big role, and she's a past avatar. If you want to hit the representation point, highlight that aspect of Kyoshi, like with the relationship with Rangi and stuff like that. Tell us some of that stuff about her. But this feels like they just, for some reason, we want to have representation, but we don't want it to be like important. So I'm like, why? Why not just keep it the same? And if their point is just like, oh, it's a legend even in the original, so we'll just change the details in our version of the show. It's just like, stop messing with things when you don't really need to, is the point. Because I don't think it's worse because they do it this way, but I also don't think it's better because they do it that way. It's just, why? They still highlight Love's brightest in the dark, and they head into the tunnels. Then we get the setup scene for this is fine, but I think it's the next scene with the captain that's the really strong one. This is mostly kind of like presented in the original, where like we're introduced to the idea of Iroh is the Dragon of the West, the 600-day siege of Ba Sing Se, and the idea that this Earthbender captain doesn't like Iroh, and so it's going to be a tough time for Iroh, and he leaves a trail behind for Zuko. Then we get this scene. This is so weird. I'm baffled by this scene. Bumi tells Aang not to go north because the Fire Nation is all over the north. Like, the north's on fire, basically. But Aang still wants to go. Again, Aang still wants to be the Avatar. But Bumi's like, the best path is not always the direct path. And Aang's like, what do you mean by that? And then the lesson here is that Aang walks straight through the Genomite crystals on the floor and they encase him. And the test, I suppose, is meant to be get around these without getting hit by the Genomite crystals. But the way Aang does it is just, he breaks out of the first crystals he gets caught in, literally takes a step forward, gets caught in more, and then breaks out of them. And then Bumi appears in front of him and is just like, great, let's move on. Like, there's no easy path. And it's like, okay. And it's just like, why are you playing these games? Like, this is such a forced way to do it. And again, it's like they want to make all of the references, but doing them in such a like weird way. I understand it. You don't want to just have the whole episode be like Sokka and Katara encased in Genomite crystals, but it still would allow them an opportunity to have most of the conversations they had in this episode, and they'd be in the palace with them already. And there's still the chance for them to do something to get the friendship arc at the end of the episode. Like, you didn't need to do the Cave of Two Lovers at all. And then this is just like, compared to the original, this is one of the challenges. Like, 2 foot of floor is covered in Genomite crystals, and it's like, get past it. I don't know. It's just so, like, the Genomite looks good, but it's so weird the way they did it here. Zuko then finds the Lotus tile, of course, and then we get into the Cave of Two Lovers scenes. Yes, Sokka realizes the map might not be correct, takes them down a different path. He really quickly get to the idea of, glowing stones on the roof, let's follow them. But in this version of it, instead of that being like the solution in a way to things, Katara points out that the crystals are pretty random, like all over the place. What about we try something different? But she doesn't actually say anything different. And it's just Sokka being like, no, we'll do my thing. And so Katara gets annoyed that Sokka's not taking her seriously. Again, she says, I'm not a little girl anymore. Their issues from the other episode do come into play, which adds a little bit more nuance than the very basic kind of like, why don't you trust me style arc they're doing here between the siblings. This at least was set up from the first episode pretty well, of like, you know, you fell for a terrorist, you supported a traitor type thing. They both have made mistakes in who they chose to kind of focus on, and it builds up to Katara being like, you are not dad, despite having this responsibility given to you by our dad. You are not dad. And this brings a silence to the kind of conversation, which gets followed up by this scene. And it's just like, it gets a bit emotional, but they mostly just talk about remembering the Southern Water Tribe. Like, imagine if Gran could see us now. To just talk about the food. Eventually, like, they'll get home and just kind of support each other a little bit. It's nice, but I also feel like this was an opportunity to really do stuff. And it almost feels like this scene is not needed because the following scene with them, or like the emotional scene they get to in the cave, works, and you don't need this one ahead of times necessarily. I get it's like a little subtle thing, but again, it's just, what? Okay. Then we get to one of the really important scenes, one of the better scenes in the episode, the Earthbender captain and Iroh. So a lot happens in this one. It's basically details about the siege of Ba Sing Se. So a year into the siege, the city had to ration fresh water. So almost halfway through, the city had to ration water. The military got privileges, so they got water and supplies. But his brother, this is interesting here, gathered supplies from his platoon to give to the children in the city who didn't have the supplies. But he also reveals that his brother was on watch when Iroh torched the eastern wall, and that there was nothing left when they put the fires out. He was 19. And so he presents the point here of like, all the lives lost, 600-day siege, and the city still stands. Was it worth it? Iroh just says they were at war, but he was a soldier. The captain says, no, you were a butcher. So very serious stuff here. Getting actually into the war in a kind of interesting way. This is the sort of stuff that like you wish, like on the Bumi side of the episode, that you were doing anything along the nuance of this to present why Bumi is the way he is. Whereas at least with Iroh, they're presenting the emotions of this in a more nuanced way and presenting some details. Whereas I think you come out of these episodes very confused by Omashu's place in the war under King Bumi for quite a while, and it is kind of awkward how it ends up happening. You know, the captain notes he still smells smoke when he sleeps. He slaps Iroh. Iroh says that the war pushes everyone to the edge. Some of us don't like what we find there. And then we get this very interesting dynamic where the captain thinks that Iroh means himself with what he just said. But actually, Iroh's talking about the captain himself, that you are more affected by this than I am. And this enrages him. Like, he earthbends, he's about to crush Iroh, but he has to be calmed down by his men. And then he says, Iroh has no humanity. He knows nothing of loss. And so immediately, this is such a heavy scene. You have to now explain it. And thankfully they do in what I think is actually the best scene of the episode. And I would arguably say, is this the best scene of the series coming up next? Let's discuss that. And this is the Lu Ten funeral scene with Iroh and Zuko, and there's some Ozai in here. It's really, really good. Like, super high quality, and I'm going to give the scene the praise it deserves. While I'm criticizing other parts of the episode, I'm going to praise this one for being good. Not just in contrast to other weaker material, but like, honestly, like I said, I think it's potentially some of the best stuff in the whole show. So we get a flashback here. Iroh is at the funeral for Lu Ten, his only son. He has abandoned the siege of Ba Sing Se after the death of his son. We, of course, get the whole idea from the honor perspective of Fire Nation culture. The visitors gossip about him leaving the battle, that his son is a hero for having died in the battle, but Iroh is a coward for like abandoning the siege, like kind of saving the lives of the rest of his men, that because he didn't either stay and succeed or die himself, he's viewed as kind of like bad. He has done something wrong within Fire Nation culture for caring and having feelings about the death of his son. And you could see the issues of kind of modern day Fire Nation from the way some of the characters act here. So Ozai tells Iroh to take comfort in the fact that Lu Ten will be forever hailed as a champion of the Fire Nation. And it's this idea of like, that's where Ozai focuses his attention on the idea of how strong Lu Ten was. Not the type of person that he was, but just that he served the nation by dying in battle, trying to help the Fire Nation. That should give you something. And I would just thank his brother for that, because at the very least, it's the kind of closest to like, oh, he showed a bit of care, saying sort of the right thing. Even though it's not ideal, as Zuko will kind of like demonstrate here. So I love the contrast with Zuko here, where we get this first shot here of like very rigid. He, I think, is effectively trying to kind of mimic what his father is saying. He's trying to be the expected prince here by saying something very similar along the lines to Ozai, that like it must be an honor to like be the father of someone who fell so valiantly in battle type thing. But he then comes back and more sincerely talks to his uncle, like opening up, showing his like actual kind of emotional connection that he can have. The idea like this is what he gets from his mother type situation, even though we don't know much about Ursa in this version of the show, of course. But then we get this interesting information on Lu Ten, that like Lu Ten gave Zuko this medal that he got for finishing first in his officer class. And Lu Ten said that it should belong to someone destined to do great things. It gave Zuko strength, and now he gives it to Iroh, kind of hoping that it will do the same. Zuko says that Lu Ten never needed the medal because Lu Ten was the strongest person Zuko ever knew. And then, even more than that, I love this, he sits next to Iroh, what seems like for the rest of the funeral, and it's just like, there we go. That is why Iroh owes Zuko. Just that moment, and I suppose moments like that, this is why Iroh connects so strongly with Zuko and wants him to go down the right path and will kind of do anything for him. and Iroh crying as you get the leaves from the vine in the background. It's perfectly done in a show that sometimes like does make some like obvious mistakes and maybe isn't like super high quality at all times, but this is a really, really, really strong scene overall. And like I said, is it the best in the entire show? I think it probably has to be this, or maybe some of the flashback stuff from Masks. But I think overall, I probably go back to that scene just because of the nuance of all of the emotions going on. Then we get the more kind of open, kind of emotional stuff between Sokka and Katara. She notes that, Jet actually did help her to improve her water bending. She understands that, like, he went down the wrong path, but he was pushed that way, just like Sai was. And Sokka then opens up about, Sai telling him that he should be an engineer. It was nice to have someone praise a skill of his for once, basically. Katara praises Sokka for taking on the burden that their father left for him, because it was so difficult, because Hakoda led the tribe with all of the other men, basically. But Sokka has no one to lead with him, so it's harder for Sokka. And I like that Katara at least notices that, and that's a nice little scene there. But then we get the whole tunnels are changing stuff at the end of, like, how are they going to get out of this one type thing. So again, as the sort of resolution to the stuff from the first episode, this is actually, like, relatively decent. I like that we've, after all of these episodes, kind of resolved the whole Katara Sokka responsibility Hakoda scene, but that's what kind of makes it almost odd that, like, and then we go straight back to it in the next episode, but we'll discuss that in episode 5, of course. Then we get to Bumi and the kind of final challenge. So there's a lot of questioning before we build up to this of, like, why are you doing this, Bumi? And that Bumi Aang knew was a fun-loving, happy kid who always thought about his friends, and he thinks that that version of Bumi is still in there somewhere. But Bumi just criticizes Aang for not focusing on responsibility and not caring about saving the world, that it's more fun to goof off, so let's play one final game, a fight, and it gets quite extreme, to the death. And again, it's just like, I get they're trying to portray the idea of that the war has changed Bumi, but what are we doing here with this? This is just, to me, awkward. Again, just from the idea of, Bumi, how is Aang not taking on his responsibility? You are the one restricting him from, like, one, trying to do anything to protect Omashu by holding him here, and protect the Northern Water Tribe. Plus, like I said earlier on, Omashu's not even involved in the war because of all this kind of criticism that you've let go on, because you are not doing your responsibility to a certain degree here. And they don't do enough to have me really make the argument of, like, oh, but the 100-Year Wars and the toll it's taken on Bumi. You didn't show us any of that. You just said it. Quick scene just to highlight the Badger Moles as they get introduced. I think they look decent. But again, why are they here a season before they probably need to be? Then we get the action scene that we saw in a clip before the launch of the show. The Zuko and Iroh versus the Earthbenders. It's pretty nice. There's not too much, I think, to really say about it here, other than the kind of character stuff at the end of, like, he doesn't finish off the Earthbender captain. He turns his back, like, there's been enough death. And the Earthbender hits him with this, like, shard of earth in the back, and it kind of injures Iroh, kind of highlighting that, like, yeah, you shouldn't just, like, turn your back on an enemy like that, so they have to escape, of course. Then we get the next scene with the Badger Moles and kind of the resolution to the secret tunnel stuff, and the whole idea here, of course, is... Actually, I want to point out this before I get into the main point here. I'm not a big fan of the fact that they have Katara waterbend at a Badger Mole. Maybe that's just me being a little bit kind of precious about the kind of bending animals, but, like, I don't think they really had anyone attack the Badger Moles in the original, so this is maybe not, like, great that she does that here, but it's just a minor point. So they hit a dead end, nowhere to go. It looks like they're about to be killed here by the Badger Moles. They're ready to accept their fate, so they hold hands, showing their care for each other here, the kind of sibling love, and the Badger Mole kind of calms down. It reveals that it's blind, and Katara explains that it navigates by feelings, specifically love, and this is the whole love is brightest in the dark aspect, is that the Badger Moles track down people who focus on love, and they guide people out through the tunnels and the the crystals don't really mean anything. It's such a weird way to just like, every time the original goes left with the Cave of Two Lovers, they go right just to do something different. It's a weird one for me. Like, it's not awful, but it's just, it is just completely, you've transplanted this episode in here, and you've lost, like, I think a lot of the heart that this episode actually had in what it was actually trying to do. So yeah, this is just this quick resolution, because we don't actually see the Badger Mole guiding them out. It's just the Badger Mole starts to make a tunnel and they'll appear in the next scene, basically. So yeah, we get the fight scene here. There is some nice earthbending moves here as Bumi gets more kind of serious in the fight. Aang, of course, defends and dodges quite well. And Bumi just talks about how, you know, sometimes you have to fight when you don't want to. And at least this line gets into maybe a little bit of like the characterization of Aang and the whole idea of, you know, like, why can't everyone just be friends? And no, sometimes you just have to fight. And maybe that is where Aang is holding back a little bit, but it's not hit as much as it needs to be. And then we get into like this thing that we've been waiting the whole episode for, and it comes back to Aang left them. The Avatar left them. He feels he can't rely on anyone, even his friends, especially his friends, and he gets angry about this. And it just feels like, given what this arc is, 100 years of war, you're really dumping all of this onto Aang and his friends, and you're not doing anything to really go into the passage of time that much. You're not showing us a flashback throughout Bumi's life to show him getting to this point. That's, I think, the biggest kind of problem that this episode has, is that if you have seen the original, it's just like, this isn't Bumi. Like why are they characterizing Bumi like this? And especially this final thing here. Bumi prepares his final attack. He chucks a huge chunk of earth at Aang, but it causes another one to basically fall on him because the cracks start and the ceiling falls. So Aang basically is holding up both of them, because Bumi at this point effectively gives up and is like, here's your choice along the same lines of the choices I have had to make for 100 years. You won't choose, but you have to choose. You have to make the hard choices in war, basically. And it's this wild thing of like, why are we doing this? Like, because this is Bumi. Like, if Katara and Sokka don't come in here, apparently, Bumi is okay either with Aang basically killing him, or Aang letting the boulder fall and the Avatar dying again. So we get a new Avatar. And it's just madness in the wrong side of things, in terms of mad genius Bumi on the other side. Like, this is like, why is this happening here? Just seeing Bumi, like, instead of the fun thing of like the draw at the end that we actually get in the original, here's that, but it's like Bumi actually has this weird intent to have at least one of them die to force Aang to make a big Avatar decision. It's like, what are we doing here? And yeah, and then it's just out of nowhere almost, even though, yeah, I get it, the setups here from the previous scene, I get it. Sokka, you know, tackles Bumi out from under the rock. Aang saves himself, and it's just like, oh, you cheated. But Aang's just like, yeah, you can rely on your friends. You know, that's how Aang is going to save the war, is with the help of his friends. He shows Bumi the Sky Bison whistle here, and you know, I'm here now is the point, and Bumi agrees. And this is kind of part of the problem here, is like, you made it so serious, and then the resolution is so power of friendship. And it's like, power of friendship can work in certain cases, but I feel it's too simplistic for the nuance that we're going for here. Because if you're trying to make some sort of a comparison here between like Bumi and Iroh in this episode, who are characterized quite heavily as being affected by the war in different ways, it's wild the approach they've taken to both characters here. Absolutely crazy that, like, you know, the nuance and depth of the stuff with Iroh, and then the simple basic storytelling with Bumi, it to me just doesn't quite work. That Bumi just completely loses all of his seriousness because Aang remembers this thing from 100 years ago. And like, okay, he proves that there is still this side of Bumi there, but it just is like, this plot didn't need to happen. This could have been used elsewhere to do other stuff. And yeah, so Bumi goes back to kind of leading the city properly. he has finally called in reinforcements. He's putting more guards on the wall. He reveals there's actually a Fire Nation attack coming in. They're basically under attack immediately. And we get the real quick resolution here. Sai helped to tip everyone off. So the network of spies in the city, the Fire Nation, has been rounded up. And Bumi's just like, you've got to go. You're needed elsewhere. But one more challenge first. And we get the delivery system ride. And it's just, okay. Super fast resolution. Did I expect any different? Not really. Again, it's not awful, but when you have an episode that shows you what you can do when you really put the time in, there's just this sense of like, you got very confused, I think, in the writing with the character of Bumi in terms of what you wanted to do with him. The interesting sides of his characters, you didn't want to remove all of them, but you wanted to do this rather basic, like the live action plot point is responsibility, the effect of the war. We're just giving that to Bumi as well, okay? And then again, this whole idea of like, he literally makes the point here, Omashu is rejoining the war. And it's like, so your whole point was silly earlier on about like Aang not taking on his responsibility because you weren't doing things until now. Okay. And then we get this scene. This is the final scene, isn't it? Yes. So Zuko and Iroh on the boat. This is obviously a flashback to Zuko starting his banishment. So the timing on this is quite interesting because, of course, it's 2 episodes before we get the details surrounding the scar and the banishment. But here is Zuko setting out. How did Iroh come to be on the journey with him? Here it is. Zuko, is like, hey, I don't need a babysitter. And Iroh says, how about a friend? And Zuko gets quite emotional here and is just like, this could be a very long journey. It might be a very long time until we return home. But Iroh points out that home, everything I need is on this boat. That he's pointing out that, like, I've got my tea, my Paisho tiles, you, and the crew. That's all I need. That's what it's about. In the same way that kind of referencing the previous kind of scene, it's like, you were there for me at the moment I needed you at that lieutenant's funeral. You helped me. I'm going to help you through this. Like, in a way, like one of the toughest moments of each of their lives, effectively. And they both helped each other through it. That's why they kind of both owe each other. And again, it's like the nuance to this versus how this one just kind of is like, eh. And I do want to make that clear. Like, while I've been critical throughout this, like, I don't think, as in terms of this overall episode, that this is like a terrible, bad, unwatchable episode or anything like that. It's just one of the clearest cut ideas of, there's literally, in my mind, the best scene, 2 of the best scenes in the entire show in this episode. But because it also follows up a very solid opening episode, the messiness that begins to come in of like why we decided to do the Cave of Two Lovers with Sokka and Katara, but then literally ignore, like, the Mechanist and Teo are dropped out of the plot the second we enter the cave. And even like Chong and the Nomads don't go with them. So we don't get the fun of like multiple characters interacting or anything like that. We don't do the Badger Moles Love Music stuff. At least, the 2 of them with the Nomads would have created a bit more of an interesting dynamic. But it's mostly just this vague wrap-up from the previous episode because for the most part, we don't really have much to do with Sokka and Katara in this episode because we play a little bit on some of the early stuff about Sokka's responsibility. Why don't you listen to me, Sokka? But there's not kind of much else there. And then the Bumi stuff and the whole responsibility, it's just, to me, mistakes were made in the construction of this. Going back to the first episode, having Aang not run away, but then deciding to have all these characters lay into Aang about the responsibility arc, when it feels like there's a point where the characters are just being absolutely, utterly, like, mean-spirited towards Aang about this. Whereas I much more appreciate the nuance of the original, where a lot of characters are quite understanding of the situation because, hey, I understand you couldn't do anything, even if you did actually make a mistake in relation to this. That the point of, if you were alive back then, you probably would have been killed because you were being directly hunted by the Fire Nation in that era. It's unfortunate for the world, but it's worked out in a way where there is hope now that you are in this era type thing. And the fact that that really doesn't get brought up is just frustrating to me. Bumi is just a weird mix of like, there was potential here, potentially, but if you're doing serious Bumi, you need to have the backup there. You need to have solid writing along the lines of the Iroh stuff, and not just he's over 100 years old, let's just assume a lot about him. Whereas they do the right stuff with Iroh and Ba Sing Se and introduction of Liu 10, none of that with Bumi. And it's really noticeable in my mind. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on Into the Dark, episode 4 of Netflix Avatar. But that has been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.